Hello and welcome. I am Professor Rashmi Raman and this is Module 14, War Crimes Part 2. Let us begin with recapitulating what we have covered in Module 1. The jurisprudence on war crimes has been developed with the help of various case laws. These we have already discussed in the preceding module. This module will focus on looking at some of the key principles that have emerged through this case law over a period of time. For the sake of comprehension and clarity, it seems appropriate to classify the different types of war crimes into four main categories according to the content of what conduct they are seeking to criminalize. These four categories are crimes relating to protected persons, 2. Crimes relating to protected goods, including private property, 3. Crimes relating to unlawful methods of warfare, and finally, crimes relating to unlawful means of warfare. When does the violation of international humanitarian law become a war crime? We have discussed this in the preceding module. The point of concurrence between international criminal law and international humanitarian law. The question is not whether a violation of international humanitarian law amounts to a war crime. Under customary international law, this can only be answered by taking into account the different sources of state practice that contribute to the existence of customary international law. For example, one might go looking for customary international law in military manuals, national legislation, judicial decisions, the official pronouncements of states. This was exemplified by the International Court of Justice in the case concerning military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua, the so-called Nicaragua versus United States of America Merits Opinion, ICJ. The general principles of criminal justice common to domestic legal systems, such as the case known as the hostages case, also of the ICJ. In fact, numerous international criminal and military courts have classified breaches of international humanitarian law as war crimes on separate occasions. However, as we have discussed in the preceding module, there is only one exhaustive list, that in the Rome Statute. How do the application of the ICTY statute, how does that deal with war crimes? In the case of Burdianin of the ICTY, four preconditions are required for Article 2 of the statute to apply. 1. The existence of an armed conflict. 2. The establishment of a nexus between the alleged crimes and the armed conflict. 3. That the armed conflict be international in nature. And finally, that the victims of the alleged crime qualify as protected persons pursuant to the provisions of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. This understanding comes from the ICTY's case of Burdianin and has been applied in subsequent cases. At this stage, it is important to understand what an armed conflict is. In the case of Prosecutor versus Kunarak, Kovac and Vukovic, known broadly as the Kunarak case, the ICTY set the standard as follows. An armed conflict is said to exist whenever there is resort to armed force between states or protracted armed violence between governmental authorities and organized armed groups or between such groups within a state. What are the principles of international humanitarian law? To understand this, one must look at the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons given on the 8th of July 1996, in which the ICJ laid down the various cardinal principles of international humanitarian law today. The court ultimately was not able to reach a definitive conclusion as to whether it would be legal or illegal to use nuclear weapons in an extreme case of self-defense when the survival of the state itself was at stake. However, the principles reiterated by the court are culled from the Geneva Conventions, and they can be summarized as follows. The first principle is aimed at the protection of the civilian population and the civilian objects and establishes a clear distinction between combatants and non-combatants. States must never make civilians the object of an attack and must consequently never use weapons that are incapable of distinguishing between civilian and military targets. According to the second principle, it is prohibited to cause unnecessary suffering to combatants. It is accordingly prohibited to use weapons causing them such harm or uselessly aggravating their suffering. In application of that second principle, states do not have the unlimited freedom of choice of means in the weapons that they use. The First Geneva Convention. Article 3 of the First Geneva Convention states as follows. In the case of armed conflict, not of an international character, occurring in the territory of one of the high contracting parties, each party to the conflict shall be bound to apply as a minimum the following provisions. 1. Persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including members of armed forces who have laid down their arms, and those placed hors de combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause, shall, in all circumstances, be treated humanely, without any adverse distinction founded on race, color, religion, or faith, sex, birth, or wealth, or any other similar criteria. To this end, the following acts are and shall remain prohibited at any time and in any place whatsoever with respect to the above mentioned persons. 1. Violence to life and person, in particular murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment, and torture. 2. The taking of hostages. 3. Outrages upon personal dignity, in particular humiliating and degrading treatment. 4. The passing of sentences and the carrying out of executions without previous judgment pronounced by a regularly constituted court, affording all the judicial guarantees which are recognized as indispensable by nations of the world. Secondly, the wounded and sick in combat and otherwise shall be collected and separately cared for. We will now look at the principles laid down by case law. The leading case is the so-called Nicaragua case, which expands to the case concerning military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua, brought before the International Court of Justice. It was alleged by Nicaragua and accepted by the court that the President of the United States had ordered mines to be laid on some ports in Nicaragua. There was also an issue of the violation of the airspace of Nicaragua as a result. The court went on to find the United States responsible for the failure to give adequate notice of the mining of Nicaraguan ports. It also found that, under general principles of humanitarian law, the United States was bound by law to refrain from encouragement of persons or groups engaged in the conflict in Nicaragua to commit violations of Common Article 3 of the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949. The Manual on Psychological Operations in Guerrilla Warfare, for the publication and dissemination of which the United States is responsible, advises certain acts which cannot but be regarded as contrary to Common Article 3. Further, the trials of Dusko Tadic before the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia were the first since the Nuremberg trials being done at the ICTY for war crimes. After the takeover of Prijedor and the attack on Kozarac, two towns of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1992, non-Serb civilians were detained in several prison facilities. These detainees were then assaulted physically as well as sexually, tortured and also killed. Dusko Tadic, the accused, was the president of the local board of the Serb Democratic Party in Kozarac. Tadic was found guilty by Trial Chamber 2 of the ICTY for crimes against humanity and the violations of laws and customs of war. Common Article 3 of the 4 Geneva Conventions lays down clear prohibitions on actions in war, including cruel treatment. Since there is no clear definition of cruel treatment, one must refer to Article 4 of the first protocol, additional to the Geneva Conventions, which provides what is prohibited is violence to the life, health, physical and mental well-being of a person. Trial Chamber 2 of the ICTY found beyond reasonable doubt that the Muslim detainees were not taking active part in hostilities and that the hostilities were committed in the context of the armed conflict and that they constitute violence to the person and that the perpetrators intended to inflict such suffering on the person. As a result of this, Tadic was ultimately awarded 20 years of imprisonment. In another case, the case of prosecutor versus Stanislas Galic, General Galic was accused of sniping and shelling attacks on civilians in Sarajevo, causing their deaths and injuries in many cases with the purpose of spreading terror among civilians. For this act, he was charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The trial chamber was convinced that sniping and shelling activities were done under the general instructions of General Galic and that he had the material ability to punish those who would go against his order, and that he was well aware of the actions of his troops. Subsequently, Galic was convicted for violating Common Article 3 of the 4 Geneva Conventions, which lay down the customs of war. He was finally convicted of the charges against him and imprisoned for 20 years. In the case of the prosecutor versus Timur Blaskic, the ICTY dealt with a violation of Article 7 of the Statute of the ICTY. Article 7 of the Statute of the ICTY defines individual criminal responsibility as follows: a person who planned, instigated, ordered, committed, or otherwise aided and abetted in the planning, preparation, or execution of a crime referred to in Articles 2 to 5 of the present statute shall be individually responsible for the crime. The official position of any accused person, whether as head of state or government or as a responsible government official, shall not relieve such person of criminal responsibility nor mitigate punishment. The fact that any of the acts referred to in Articles 2 to 5 of the present statute were committed by a subordinate does not relieve their superior of criminal responsibility if the superior knew or had reason to know that the subordinate was about to commit such acts or had done so, and the superior failed to take the necessary and reasonable measures to prevent such acts or to punish the perpetrators thereof, had the acts already been committed. In the Blaskic case, trial began on the 24th of June 1997 before Trial Chamber 1. The tribunal delivered its decision on the 3rd of March 2000. The case relates to crimes that were perpetrated during the conflict between the Croatian Defense Council and the Bosnian Muslim Army in the Lava Valley region of central Bosnia. from May 1992 until January 1994. The appellant, Tihomir Blaskic, was the commander of the HVO armed forces in central Bosnia at the time that the crimes at issue were being committed. Article 7 of the ICTY statute speaks about individual criminal responsibility as we have just defined. Blaskic was convicted under Article 7 Clause 1 for ordering the crimes and for failing to take reasonable measures to prevent the perpetrators under his control. He was not, however, convicted for planning or instigating the crimes. Therefore, the question before the appeals chamber of the ICTY was whether a standard of mens rea, that is criminal intention, lower than direct intent would have applied to Blaskic or not. The trial judge noted that any person who, in ordering an act, knows that there is a risk of crimes being committed and accepts that risk shows the degree of intention necessary to constitute recklessness so as to incur responsibility for having thus ordered, planned, or incited the commitment of the crimes themselves. The appeals chamber, however, held that the trial chamber failed to clearly specify the degree of risk and stated that a person who orders an act or omission with awareness of the substantial likelihood that a crime will be committed in the execution of that order has the requisite mens rea for establishing liability under Article 7 Clause 1 pursuant to ordering his subordinates. The trial court had further convicted Blaskic under both 7.1 and 7.3. Appeals chamber, however, held that if a charge is brought under both the provisions, then only the charge under 7.1 should be considered. Blaskic was ultimately sentenced to 9 years in prison. In the case of the prosecutor versus Garmain Katanga, the ICTY had further reason to investigate this. On February 24th, the village of Bogoro in the DRC was attacked. 200 civilians were killed, many were detained. The detainees were placed in camps filled with dead bodies. Many women and girls were raped and kept as sexual slaves. The case came before the International Criminal Court for violation of provisions of the Rome Statute. Individual criminal responsibility was attached to Katanga according to Articles 25 Clause 3 Subclause A of the Rome Statute, which reads as follows. In accordance with the statute, a person shall be criminally responsible and liable for punishment for a crime within the jurisdiction of the court if that person commits such a crime, whether as an individual, jointly with another, or through another person, regardless of whether that other person is criminally responsible. The charges put on Garmain Katanga for the killings in Bogoro by the prosecutor of the ICC were willful killing as a war crime under Article 8.2a of the statute, directing an attack against a civilian population as such or against individual civilians, or not taking direct part in hostilities under Article 8.2b1 of the statute. Destruction of property as a war crime under Article 8.2b13 of the statute. Pillaging as a war crime under 8.2b17 of the statute, in the knowledge that this crime would occur in the ordinary course of events and jointly committed within the meaning of Article 25.3a of the statute, the war crime of using children under the age of 15 years to participate actively in the hostilities under Article 8.2b26 of the statute. Garmain Katanga was initially charged as an indirect co-perpetrator, but was ultimately convicted for being an accessory to the crime. His role was to supply arms to the people who carried out the final attack, thereby reinforcing the striking capability of the attackers. The chamber noted inter alia that Garmain Katanga, in the run up to the attack and as a key protagonist in the alliances which the militia had forged, contributed to reinforcing the strike capability of the Ingiti militia, which carried out the crimes committed in the territory of Bogoro on the 24th of February 2003. Katanga also contributed by virtue of his position in Aviba, the only area in the collectivity with an airport which could accommodate aircraft transporting weapons, to equipping the militia and enabling it to operate in an organized and efficient manner. Throughout the preparatory period of the attack in Aviba, Katanga was the intermediary of choice between the suppliers of weapons and ammunition and the physical perpetrators of the crimes, who were to deploy such weaponry in Bogoro. Absent that considerable supply of weapons to the Ingiti community, and absent the accused Katanga's contribution, which entailed organizing and facilitating the supply of weapons at a local level, the commanders and combatants of the Walendu Bindi collectivity would not have had some of the advantages or have been able to commit with as much efficiency the crimes which were ultimately perpetrated in the Bogoro province against the Hema civilian population. The trial chamber further established that Katanga knew of the intention of the group to commit the crimes, which formed the common purpose, since he knew that the Ingiti militia was preparing an operation against Bogoro with the support of authorities in Beni. He also knew that the weapons and ammunition, whose receipt and distribution he facilitated, would be used by the combatants during the attack, and that he was fully aware of how war was waged in the Ituri province and of the ensuing suffering by which the civilian population had suffered. Katanga also knew that a massacre of civilians had occurred in early September 2002 during the attack by, among others, Ingiti combatants against the Nyakunde and the resident Bira population, which was then allied to the Hema people, and that he knew therefore that the Ingiti combatants from Walendu Bindi had already violently attacked the civilian population and were driven by an ideology inimical to the Hema. Let us finally look at the distinction between international armed conflict and non-international armed conflict, the so-called NIAC. Article 2 of the Geneva Conventions speak about international armed conflict and state that all cases of declared war or any other armed conflict which may arise between two or more high contracting state parties. Due to a difference in the nature of conflicts, two problems arise. First, problems might arise if a state is not recognized by other states. Does this have an impact on the applicability of the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols subject to the Geneva Conventions? The second problem relates to the gravity of the conflict. An international armed conflict might be completely without arms. For example, a case of occupation of one state by another without any resistance on behalf of either state would also be considered an international armed conflict. Non-international armed conflicts, on the other hand, are fought within a state between the government and extremists or rebels, or between two rebel groups within the territory of a state. The Geneva Conventions are largely silent on these conflicts. Only Common Article 3 speaks about non-international armed conflict. Some also argue that Common Article 3 of the 4 Geneva Conventions has become part of jus cogens. A certain threshold has to be passed before a conflict can be termed as a non-international armed conflict, instead of it being merely an internal disturbance. There must be deployment of military forces and not just police forces. Some other international instruments that focus on NIACs or non-international armed conflicts are the 1977 First Protocol, additional the Second Protocol to the Geneva Conventions, and relating to the protection of victims of non-international armed conflict, the 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons as amended and its protocols, the 1998 Statute of the International Criminal Court, etc. Protection given to civilians. In this part, we will look at what kinds of laws give protections to civilians. While customary international law requires that in the case of non-international armed conflict, as in an international armed conflict, a distinction be made between combatants and civilians, and the least amount of damage possible be done to civilians, it is important to know whether the word combatants has to be understood in its strict technical sense or not. An ICRC study suggests that the term is to be given a generic meaning, that even civilians in special cases may be termed as combatants. Their protection is lifted according to Article 13.3 of Additional Protocol 2. The loss of protection lasts only so long as the civilians take direct or active part in the hostilities. Thank you.